Hey, dear listener. Welcome back to the Deliberate Scribe podcast, where we help Christian writers be deliberate and redemptive in writing, thinking, and living. But I also help everybody who would like to know more about writing. Last week, I let you dangle on the cliff because I started talking about character psychology, but I saw that the episode was getting so long that I cut it in two. So that's where we are going to pick it up again. First, I want to invite you to go to yourbeststory.net and subscribe to my newsletter. And then you can receive a free coaching call with me, 1 hour to carve a path forward with you, no strings attached. Okay, let's continue talking about character psychology. I'll read again the quote from Barry Morrow, as quoted in Creating Unforgettable Characters by Linda Sager. Half of writing is psychology. There is a consistent core or a consistent unity to behavior. People don't act willy-nilly. To be consistent with human behavior, you have to know what people will do in most situations. People don't act without reason. Every action has motivation and intention. So how do you see the psychology of your character on the page? It has to do with what your character wants. What is the desire? I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said that as soon as you see a character on the page, they need to want something, even if it's only a glass of water. They must want something. And your character needs weaknesses so that they have something that they can overcome. Because a story is truly about the transformation of a character. Blake Snyder, I already mentioned him in relation to the limp and the eye patch. He talks about 6 things that need fixing, that should be part of the setup of a story. Well, I don't like to make it too formulaic, but I do like this idea of looking at it. Like when you set up your story in the first part of the book, make sure that there are things in the character that are not okay. Things that he needs to overcome. It could be shyness, it could be trust issues, it could be traumas, it could be grief, it could be fear, it could be attachment issues or anger issues or whatever. All kinds of things that the character is struggling with that need to be overcome. And part of the psychology is also the ways in which these weaknesses begin to show. They can show inwardly, people becoming very shy, never talk to anybody, harboring a lot of anger inside that never comes out, etc. Or outwardly, that all the frustration comes out. People yell and express everything that is inside of them in such a way that it's very difficult to miss for everybody around. Or a person who is always silent, but then as soon as he gets a bit ticked off, suddenly explodes. I'm unfortunately more a person like that. I am very calm and very silent and so, but once I am overstimulated, I might snap, and that is my personality, that is my psychology. And if I would ever write an autobiography, then that is something that is hopefully the transformation that I will have gone through by then. I don't get aggressive or so don't worry. The psychology is also the why. Why are there trust issues? Why are there traumas? Why is there grief? Why is there fear? Why are there attachment issues? Why is there anger? Etc., etc. And it helps to come up with story ideas and to flesh out this psychology of the character. It helps really to observe the people around. Well, I guess we get to a weak point of mine now here again, because I am really a dreamer. I'm more likely to just sit somewhere and be with my head in my stories entirely, just completely off the planet, that I forget to observe. But actually, for writers, the skill of observation is crucial. So I need to remind myself, shake myself awake all the time and say, come on, observe. Look at the people. What are they doing? How are they behaving? What are they saying? What kind of movements are they making? And if you have more people together, how are they interacting with each other? Is there one person who sits up straight and the other is hunching a bit? And what are the dynamics in groups and so? So shake yourself awake, remind yourself, look at these things, because there's so much inspiration for your characters in the people that you can actually just look at when you're sitting in a restaurant or something like that. And read psychology books and articles. You can learn a lot from that. And also just reading biographies, reading nonfiction, you can learn a whole lot about human behavior. And that behavior can become inspiration for the backstories and the psychology of your characters. And then I would say take your time to develop the characters. And it's also no problem if while you are writing the story that you find out something new about the character to later change that backstory and the psychology a little bit. And then in a later edit, make sure that comes out a bit, that it is consistent. Because it might be that halfway into your book you are in the pub and you see somebody and you think, wow, this is my character. This is the missing ingredient to make my character really interesting. Because that is also a thing. You don't want to be only consistent. You want to also surprise your reader a bit with a contradiction in the psychology of your character, but that is not so random that it doesn't seem to make sense anymore. You will feel it when there's something off, and otherwise your alpha or beta readers will notice it. But you want to go for consistency, but at the same time also have contradictions, because human psychology is full of contradictions. As I just said, most people know me as a very calm person, and most of the time I am calm, also at home. But there are also the moments that I lose my patience, and that is not how the person whom I work with know me. So there's a contradiction seemingly in my character, in my psychology. So you might say that if you observe me, you have inspiration for a character. Okay, there's, by the way, a very nice book here. I mentioned it just now already. Creating Unforgettable Characters by Linda Sager. I don't know if this book is still available. It's written in 1990. It is very old. Also, the cover design is like, you cannot get away with that anymore now. The author of Making a Good Script Great. It's actually mostly aimed at script writers, but there is a wealth of information about character building, character psychology, etc. This book is really inspiring me when I think about characters and when I'm developing characters. The character psychology and what I said, those 6 things that need fixing, create internal conflict. And that is actually the root of the story. The root of the story is the internal conflict of your character. That is what needs to be fixed. That is what the story is about. And that's why in the monomyth, Campbell's hero's journey that Vogler reduced to 12 steps, the ordeal, or the big clash, if you will, is inside the hero. When he meets the inner issue and overcomes the inner issue, that is actually the moment that the big change happens. That is the highlight of the story. So that is called the ordeal. That is really the big victory that the hero goes through. And then with that transformation, which is the core of the story, the hero can have victory over the antagonist. So the clash with the antagonist is actually not the true climax of the story. The true climax of the story is the moment that the character has this insight that will change them forever and that will prepare the character to finally face this final antagonist. And that is also part of the road back. So you have these 12 steps and that leads up to the ordeal, and then the road back is yet a fight that needs to be done. So the fighting with the antagonist is part of the return journey. And the real fight that the story is truly about is the fight that is inside the character. The big thing, the biggest thing that needs fixing. So the story is really about the hero's transformation, the fixing of character flaws. It is really about the character arc, more than about plot. And the better we do all this, the more connection the reader will feel with the character. And that's what it is about. That's why we write. We write to create this connection between the reader and the character. We try to get the reader's emotions to play along. The deeper this transformation is and the more real this character goes through this transformation and the more real the issues that the character is facing are for us, the more emotionally involved we will be. But however deep we want to make it, we must be certain that all the characters are distinct. So even if we don't want to go into this super depth with the characters, and we shouldn't do that with all of the characters, of course, still they must be really distinct. Well, I always like to take Lord of the Rings as an example because it is and will probably always be my favorite book. If you see in The Lord of the Rings how different characters speak, you will see that some of the characters have a distinct voice. Some are so distinct that you can identify them at a glance without even seeing the names. If you would just have all these quotes separately on a paper, you can immediately see who says what. The enthusiasm of Pippin, for example, and sometimes he comes across as not too intelligent. And in basically everything he says, you feel the Pippinness of it. And with Sam is a completely different character. But everything he says is typically Sam. And it sounds typically like Sam. He has a very peculiar way of constructing sentences. So it is very important to make sure that not all the characters sound the same. So also for that, make sure that you know the character. Even if you have very flat characters and you want to keep them very sketchy, on purpose, make sure that at least the way they show themselves is always consistent and is unique, is not comparable with the others. So this demands planning, this demands homework. I have an Excel sheet on my computer. I think I spoke about that before. The monomyth is in the left column, and then scenic outline, all the scenes outlined, and then beside those scenes, the conflict in the scene, the attitudes that the characters have, the desires that the characters have, etc. And all the way to the right, I have a summarization of all the characters. And there I write down what kind of sentence structures, what kind of talking, what kind of tone, what kind of attitude they have when they talk. What kind of movements do they make? So all these specifics I list. When I think about all these things, of course, when I'm developing the character and when I'm writing down ideas, and so I always do that with pen on paper. I really love working with pen on paper. But I also know that if I write these kind of things down on scraps of paper or even in notebooks, I will never be able to find it back. I'm not I'm not organized enough for that. So I use an Excel sheet. Once I have these character traits figured out, I summarize them in this Excel sheet. And that's how I create consistency in these characters and have a reminder that I regularly read through of how my different characters behave and what their moods are and what their temperaments are and their attitudes and their points of view and those kind of things. If you want to do this right, you need to make sure that you know your characters very well. And if you are like me and you're not spending entire days writing is unfortunately not my day job, then you're gonna need some tools to stay consistent also when it takes you over a year to write a book. It can happen that at some point you begin to write plot-drivenly, if you will. That you are so busy writing through the plot that you forget about the characters. Well, if you remind yourself regularly of the psychology of all your characters and their temperaments and so, you only have to imagine, you have to see it in your mind. What character is talking? And automatically, or more automatically at least, the right kind of words and sentence structures will come up. Because in your mind, this particular character that you created and that you know so well is doing the talking. There again, it's the deliberate scribe. This podcast is The Deliberate Scribe, and that is because I want to inspire you to be really deliberate with these things. And by being very deliberate, you can make your characters shine more. As I just said, the attitude is one really important column in this Excel sheet. Attitude, points of views, the behaviorisms, those I also note for scenes. What is the specific attitude of a character towards what is happening in a scene? I wanted to mention this separately still because I think it is very easy to let scenes become dull when the characters don't have enough of an attitude. So for every time you write a scene, look at the characters that are involved and what are their attitudes. What is a likely attitude for this character to have towards what is happening in this particular scene? So it can be very helpful when you are planning your scene to look at the character psychology and think, okay, how will this character interact with what is happening here? And how can I make that a bit more interesting, a bit more fun? Like also in this book by Linda Sager, Creating Unforgettable Characters, she is stressing that attitude is absolutely necessary to give life to a scene. And I believe that is really true. And she said that for television series, she had managed to save a lot of scenes from certain death by just adding some attitude. Just give somebody a certain attitude about the topic, and then, whoop, the scene came to life. It's a bit of a mess now, this podcast, but I wanted to give this tip still. Just make sure that your characters have an attitude stemming from their psychology. Okay, I'm coming now to the last thing about character. The last thing I wanted to say about character. Does a character have to be likable? It is very often said that you need to make sure that your reader likes your character. And yes, I think that is true. You need to give the reader a reason to root for your character. Because after all, it is your character that has to go through the transformation. And your reader must want this transformation. But for that, the character does not always have to be likable. There is one famous example that everybody knows, and that is Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. He is absolutely not likable. But the story itself holds a promise, and we see his potential, I think. So it is the promise that throughout the story, Ebenezer Scrooge is going to change, and that is what makes us curious as to what's going to happen to him. How is he going to change? So there are exceptions. Your character does not always have to be likable. But I do think that it needs to be a particular kind of story that allows for a character that is not so likable. And in this case, of course, also the transformation is from not likable to likable. If you have an unlikable character that goes from being too scared to being confident, then I don't think the reader will care so much about it, because the reader doesn't care so much about this character to begin with. I can imagine that not everybody will agree with me here, but this is also a matter of opinion. And I've read characters in books that I didn't like, and therefore the book also didn't do so much for me. I want a character to be a person with whom I could be friends. But that is my opinion. If you have a story where the character is absolutely not likable and you think you can come up with a story in which that fits, then go for it. Try it out. And if you'll manage it, I'll say kudos. In most cases, you'll want to go for a likable character that has flaws. So don't make them too likable. Too likable, then there is no conflict. You need this internal conflict, remember, otherwise there is no story. But in general, the character needs to be likable enough. I have to think again of Blake Snyder. He calls his book Save the Cat because in the beginning of movies, he always wants to put a save the cat moment to have the viewer like the character. And I think that is an important thing. In my writing, I also try to do that, to create a situation for my main characters to do things that will make the reader like them. So a save the cat moment. I hope I will never sink so low that I will actually have a character of mine save a cat. But the point is clear. An act of kindness, a selfless act, something like that, that will make the people like the character. And then your reader is way more likely to be willing to spend 12, 15, 20 hours of their lives with your character. So what about character in nonfiction? As I said, I wouldn't speak of character development, but of character discovery. If you want to write the story of somebody's life, or use a certain person, write about a certain person who has a certain profession or whatever, and you want to turn this person really into a character, as a sort of a protagonist in the story. So that takes a lot of time, but it can be done, and it has been done many times, successfully. The investigative journalist will observe the character in his or her natural habitat for a while. We call this the fly on the wall principle. The journalist is part of the life of this character long enough to start noticing the brushstrokes, the particular elements that make this person interesting. I just mentioned Barry Morrow, and he is the writer of Rain Man. And I read a while ago that he and actor Dustin Hoffman, and actually the whole team, were really flies on the wall in people's houses where somebody had autism. And they were observing, and I read that Dustin Hoffman was actually very often walking beside this boy, moving in exactly the same way as he did, just imitating the movements and imitating the kind of talking so that he could become that character. And we as writers, when we are writing, Rain Man is of course a fictional story, but it is based on a real diagnosis, of course. If we want to write realistically about a certain person, we need to study how this person is moving, how this person is talking, and then find the brushstrokes that will create this immediate image in readers' minds, so that you don't have to take half a page to describe that person and bore your reader, but you can get a really nimble, quick characterization that immediately sparks the reader's interest and helps the reader also, that the reader will fill in the rest until more becomes clear. Most of the time you will not have a story arc and those kind of things, but if you know the elements of the monomyth, the hero's journey, if you know these elements, all the elements of character development, then you will start spotting those elements when you are observing people, when you are a fly on the wall. You will start spotting the brushstrokes that matter. Those traits that the person you write about shows that will create an emotion in your reader, those are the brushstrokes that you need to learn to recognize. And in that regard, I think it's also very useful for every nonfiction writer to read fiction regularly, because good fiction, of course, because good fiction writers will show through their craft what the brushstrokes are that matter. And if you get a sense for that, you can be a fly on the wall and start recognizing those things. Like, hey, this is an interesting feature that this person has. This is an interesting behaviorism. This is an interesting turn of phrase. Everything that stands out to the writerly mind, if you will. So can be very helpful to study how fiction writers are introducing their characters. Okay, that's it for this episode. Next time I want to go more into character relationships, because often the stakes of a story are based on the relationship that the characters have with other characters. And the relationship with other characters can bring a lot of suspense. So I want to talk more about that next time. And a reminder, you can still go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, www.yourbeststory.net, yourbeststory.net. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And of course, when you subscribe to my newsletter, you can get a free coaching call with me in which I help you finish your book. Or if you're entirely stuck with it, I can help you carve a way forward. Well, whatever you need, whatever your writing trouble is, I can help you move forward. God bless you on your writing journey, and I hope to meet you here next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.